You're listening to the Transformative Podcast, brought to you by the Research Center for the History of Transformations at the University of Vienna.
This is an episode of the Transformative Podcast, which is brought to you by the Research Center for the History of Transformations at the University of Vienna. And I'm Rosamund Johnston, and today I'm speaking to a dear colleague, Mojmír Stránský, and a very special guest, Dr. Věra Gregorová. And I was wondering if one of you two might be able to tell us where we are recording this podcast today and its significance.
It is called the Hotel Post Cooperative, but it was called the Czech House Cooperative until 1942. So there was an empire which is known as the Austrian Hungarian monarchy, and the Czechs had a very dominant position as an economic force. Not only economic, but also, of course, cultural interests. And therefore, there was the urgency to find a stable area where they could come and lodge, have their meetings, have their social clubs, and also social meetings. And today, in the Hotel Post Cooperative, we still have the possibility to look at the ballrooms which they use, because now we have an opera sitting there and playing. Yeah. So basically, we are talking of complex in the middle of the city, not far from the former administrative center of Bohemia, which is, say, in walking distance.
So the Hotel Post sounds like it has been historically a centre for Czech cultural life in Vienna. I was wondering if I could ask you, Mojmír, perhaps about how that cultural life has changed over the past century. What sorts of activities were being planned a century ago, and then what are you working on organising right now?
We have now in Vienna 3 centers of the minority. The most important center is actually Hotel Post here. That's our head office. And we have then the schools of Komenský Association, which is very important for today's Czech-speaking minority and Slovak-speaking minority as well in Vienna. And the church. That would be the third.
The 3 pillars.
Yeah, 3 pillars of the minority here. Cultural, we have the Czech and Slovak Minority Ball. It's actually one of the most important events of the year, because it is connecting the Czech minority with the Czech school, because we are using it as a matura
ball.
Yes. And so the young people are there, and they are celebrating their 18 year and the end of gymnasium times and the starting of the next level of their life. And the old minority is there too. Then we have a very strong sport tradition with Sokol, which is also represented in this house. Sokol is also connected to Komenský Association. Interesting in bringing young people more to volleyball, actually. That's the main sport.
When we talk about Czech Vienna, who do we mean? Who is a Czech and who historically was a Czech? And is there a kind of correlation between what we would say as Czechs from the Czech Republic today and the kind of founding fathers and mothers of Czech Vienna?
Let's go into migration. Vienna expanded 1850 enormously, and there was a need of all sorts of labor. Not only, best known is the big factories and all the labor, the cheap labor, which they drew mainly from Moravia and Slezsko, Silesia, and also Slovakia. So this is one part. This was not so highly regarded by the Viennese, right? But then you had all the nannies, the most cooks, and the greengrocery, which came through Znojmo and was kind of feeding the community here. So basically there are many roots. And not to forget that the tailors, the carpenters, shoemakers. These trades also came. So if you go to Graben, you will still find the traces there. So basically, these have been people who brought their trade to a very high art. So I'm coming from a Schneider, a tailoring dynasty, let's put it this way. We are proud of this as well, because you will find in the references which clubs have formed here, that there have been also these trades represented. And we still have people who have really made themselves known in this area.
Mojmír, you are active at the University of Vienna, finishing off your dissertation on a study of Czechoslovakia in the 1980s and 1990s, if I understand it correctly. Yes. I am interested in the way in which you think that the work that you are doing is relevant to broader Austrian society today. You're writing it in German. I mean, what are the connections that you think sort of predate, I suppose, the revolution, and why should Austrians be interested in, what has happened to a former, part of their territory decades after?
My research is actually on associations and voluntary work and actions. And so I can show in my work that the connections between Austrian and Czechoslovakian never stopped, actually. Even during the 70s, 80s, 90s, after 89, it was everything possible. But even before 89, these connections were surprisingly strong, and it was possible to have cross-bordering, living on one part of the border and to go to the other with the right explanation why. And in my case, it is the voluntary fire departments. The voluntary fire departments are here in Austria very strong. It's a similar situation to the Czech Republic. And they were organized in an international organization and met each other every year. I found old technic support stuff going to the Czechoslovakia from Austria officially, but they sold, for instance, new vehicles to Czechoslovakia to get them a little bit more support as an example of coordination and working together.
Mojmír, as well, studying history, you teach it, and you teach it at the Czech Gymnasium here in town. Why would you want to, and why would you choose to teach at a Czech school, of all the gymnasia in this city?
That's a good question, but I would say it's not just Czech gymnasium. It's actually an Austrian gymnasium with a Czech and Slovak tradition. And so for me, it is interesting to deal with students from Czech Republic, Slovakia, and also Austria. We have 3 different backgrounds in the families, and I'm not speaking about mixed marriage people. We have a lot of them, Spanish, Czech, or whatever. This specific mixture make it interesting for me because, we are here in Vienna. Vienna is become again metropole with dozens of languages and people coming from anywhere of the world. But the Czech, Slovak, and Austrian-based Czechs or Slovak-speaking people concentrating in this school system of Komenský are dealing with a very small area, with this Middle European area. And so I would say it is a kind of exercising being international in a small region, and that makes it interesting for me. And teaching history is always about, you have to look after this multi-approach. How can an act be described from a Czech view of a German-speaking person or a Czech-speaking person or a Jewish Czech or German-speaking person, and the same act might have another impact on an Austrian Czech or German-speaking person. And this makes it very interesting for me to deal with these.
So last question for the pair of you, because you're very active in this space and you have a certain amount of influence in it. What are your hopes for the Hotel Post and the Czech community in Vienna for, let's say, 30, 50 years' time?
Look, the Hotel Post is an operation which is sustaining the cooperative. So we still try to have the cooperative members come from the minority or being at least strongly related. Up to now, we are conducting our meetings in Czech. I do not know what will be in, say, 5 years. I cannot tell you because it's not so easy.
I like this idea of multilinguality. That is the most important part. And I would say that Czech and Slovaks here in Vienna could play an important role to bring German back to the Czech Republic because young people are communicating in English with each other. Our students from Komenský and people spending a little bit of their life in Vienna or Austria are used to use German again. And so they are able to live in this old tradition of German, Czech speaking, let's say, family life, in these two countries. And that might be important for the next decades. But also hope that we can still live in a way we used to, which means open borders and the possibility of traveling to Slovakia or Czech Republic, even to an afternoon tea, and that is my hope
same
for.
Kitchen habit. No, I have one more addition because you said this house. I will most definitely try further to kind of keep this facility, hoping that the health system will kind of have the upper hand and people will be clever enough to do the vaccinations, and somehow we will overcome it like we overcame flu in the past or other pandemic situations. But it's actually impairing us a lot. Yeah.
All right, well, on that not most delightful note, but in this most delightful space, which is all lit up by Christmas lights on Christmas trees and which is looking very nice and festive, thank you very much, Mojmír Stránský and Dr. Věra Gregorová.
You have been listening to the Transformative Podcast produced by RECET in Vienna.